Do you see it the way I do? A quiet sky with one thin line moving where last night there was none. A postcard from the small hours, addressed to a patient mind. I'm here beside you, voice low, shoulders loose, letting the dark do its calming work. We'll drift through a gentle question together, the kind that doesn't hurry and doesn't bite. What happens when a traveller from far away slides across our neighbourhood, indifferent and beautiful? If it's comfortable, settle your phone, lower the glow, and, only if it helps, put on headphones. If you nod off while listening, that is success, not failure. The science will keep its shape, whether your eyes are open or closed. I keep my language soft and my steps small. First, we notice light. Then we let the numbers breathe. We shape no grand claims. We hold the line between wonder and worry and simply watch how a path curves when warmed by a star and nudged by breath from ice. The great planet out there is not an omen, only a quiet presence. We'll visit it the way one visits a museum at night, hands behind the back, eyes adjusting, curiosity unarmed. You can picture a desk lamp, a thermos, and a notebook that remembers what we forget. You can picture a dome turning with the earth, smooth and slow. The traveller keeps gliding. We keep listening. Somewhere between those motions, sleep finds room. I will speak in a steady cadence, keeping only the pieces we need. We'll begin at the edge of awareness, where a faint smear becomes a thought worth following. No chase, no alarm, just a true, small thing seen clearly. 02:17 UTC. The dome breathes in slow circles, a pale motor turning under a cold sky, and the screen in front of me writes one small note of light, where yesterday there was none. I mark the hour like a postcard to future us. The air is steady, the sensor quiet, and the field is ordinary on purpose. Ordinary nights are where unusual things feel safe to show themselves. A faint smear steps between stars, just enough motion to rise above noise. I sit back, shoulders soft, and let the room settle around the glow. A thin silver arc sketches itself in my thoughts. We will follow that arc the way a harbour watcher keeps to the beam of a distant lighthouse. Not chasing, just watching. Interstellar means energy enough to escape, a path shaped like an open curve. In the language of orbits, the number that describes that openness is greater than 1, and the trajectory is called hyperbolic. It's not a dramatic word in the math, only precise. It tells us the traveller came from outside the sun's family and will not be bound by it. That knowledge arrives early or late, depending on how much sky we've gathered and how clean the measurements are. Tonight, all I hold is the first whisper of motion across a grid of reference stars. Tomorrow we'll add more dots. The curve will breathe, as numbers do when they learn together. For now, I write the basics and let the dark keep its calm. We begin with coordinates and times. Each image stamps a position. Fit those points, and a first path appears like pencil on tracing paper. The fit is fragile at the start, because a few points can mimic many possible curves. So we do not crown any one of them as truth. We embrace the way uncertainty has shape. It is not a void, it is an ellipse of maybe, a gentle cloud around the line. Night by night, telescopes far from here will add their own careful dots. Residuals shrink, the line tightens, the pencil becomes ink. And when sunlight wakes volatiles on the traveller's face, the path may lean slightly, a breath from ice nudging motion in silence. Far away in the chart's margin sits Jupiter, massive and patient. I do not make it a character in a play, only a quiet actor whose gravity writes long sentences in the solar system. From this distance, its pull is faint, and almost nothing that still matters when added for weeks and months. I picture its hill sphere as a kind of jurisdiction of influence, not a wall, just a zone where a passing thing can feel a stronger tug. Our visitor is nowhere near that tonight. Still, the mind notices patterns. The hand that keeps the log draws a compass rose near the giant's name, not with worry, but with respect for the scale of things. Now, slowly, we set the numbers down and let a still weave of night take the weight from the mind. Air slides along the dome slit with a paper sound. The mount ticks the tiniest tick. A moth performs a single brief orbit of the monitor and decides against landing. The heater under the thermos exhales once, then rests. A plane far above threads a soft line from west to east, and its rumble arrives as a felt sound more than a hard one. The smell in the room is dust and solvent and clean metal. On the horizon, a fishing boat's mast light blinks at a pace the body recognizes as human patient. And in the screen's dark, a pale dot advances one subpixel, then another, like a thought remembering itself. Back to the page, gentler than before. The first solution is only a courtesy, a way to say hello to the data without gripping too hard. Another station will confirm the motion or not. It's common to lose a faint thing to cloud, to moonlight, to the soft sabotage of fatigue. So we share and look again. The minor planet folks will receive the notices, and the orbit solvers will let their software breathe. Somewhere, someone is measuring the seeing, writing it as a single number that contains all the shimmer our eyes can't count. And someone else is checking the clock against a pulse whose confidence grounds the whole chain. The work is patient work. It suits the hour. I keep Jupiter in the same sentence as caution because it is easy to overdraw connections. And the sky remains an honest place only when we underclaim. The great planet sits far off like a town's lighthouse, steady, bright, and not particularly concerned with the small boat leaving a thin track on the water below. The track matters to us, though. It is how we learn. It is how we test the small pushes that sunlight gives to ice and dust, how we see the curve loosen or tighten as the traveller rotates, how we sense that even in the vastness, centimetres per second can accumulate into stories told in lines and angles. The hour turns, and the new dot becomes a line in the ledger, nothing more and nothing less. If it keeps its speed and its open curve, we will call it a visitor with no map, the third we've recognized among our lights. If it fades, we will let it go without complaint. The dome will close. The night will give its heat back to the air. And somewhere far beyond our attention, the thin silver arc will keep writing across a page larger than all our rooms. Lights click low. The harbour is quiet. Fade gently into the next piece of the story. An inventory of small facts. Timestamp, filter, exposure length. Plate scale in arc seconds per pixel. The catalogue used for reference stars. Air mass at the start and at the end. Sky background counts. Read noise. Gain. The minor drift of the mount when a gust leans against the dome. The offset we apply to bring catalogue and camera into the same sky. None of these are dramatic. Together, they become the low hum under the melody. I like to say the numbers learn each other. They arrive like strangers and leave arm in arm, a curve drawn not by will, but by agreement. That's how the orbit begins here, as a tidy desk full of quiet entries. The first fits are gentle guesses. We take 3 or 4 positions, solve for a path, and accept that many other paths still pass the test. Least squares sounds decisive, but in truth it is a negotiator, finding the centre of what the data can bear. Around that centre sits a covariance ellipsoid, a shape that tells us how uncertain we are and in which directions we are most likely to be wrong. It looks like fog around a thin trail, and our work is to make the fog thinner without pretending it isn't there. Photometry adds a second thread. The point is not just where the traveller is, but how it behaves as a source of light. A bare nucleus brightens with geometry, an active body brightens with breath. We measure a quantity with a small, sturdy name, alpha, that compresses coma brightness into a single gauge. If it rises with decreasing distance from the sun, we suspect gas and dust are joining the scene. A little colour work with different filters hints at particle sizes. None of this is loud. It is the sound of snow being shoveled far down the block, even-toned, telling you what the street is doing without needing to see it. When activity is present, the path may not be purely gravitational. That is where the Marsden non-gravitational terms enter. A1, A2, A3, tiny accelerations, aligned roughly with the line to the sun, the direction of motion, and the normal to the orbit. We do not bolt them on at whim. We wait. We look for residuals that lean, for a persistent drift that gravity alone does not explain. Then, carefully, we let the solver try a small A2 or A1 and ask if the leftover errors grow smaller in a way that holds for new nights too. If they do, we keep the term. If they don't, we put it back on the shelf. A few millimeters per second added over weeks can tilt a story, and yet the whole effect still fits inside a whisper. Across the planet, other domes collect their own small facts. Someone at a bigger mirror gets the same target in sharper seeing. A team in a different longitude covers the hours we miss. The minor planet center stitches these efforts into a shared fabric, issuing circulars that keep the conversation honest. What arrives at my desk tomorrow will have other hands in it, and that is a comfort. The plot that owns my attention is not glamorous. It is a scatter of residuals, observed minus computed, tilted this way, then that, as we adjust assumptions. On a good night, the dots tighten around zero like thread drawing cloth. On a confusing night, the dots wander, and we resist the urge to chase them with too many parameters. A simple model that holds under new data is kinder than a clever one that only flatters yesterday. Every correction is small, and yet, because they are small, they sum without jarring the ear. And in that summation, the tightening loop appears, a line that once needed both hands to keep steady, now resting smoothly along the palm, while the loose fibers pull themselves into a single strand we can follow without squeezing. It helps to picture geometry in slow motion. The traveller's arc crosses planes and longitudes we define for convenience. The sun writes the deepest curve, the planets add ornaments to the line. Jupiter is still far away in influence, but not absent. Its hill sphere is enormous compared with our traveller's wanderings, and its reach extends by gravity farther than the popular pictures admit. That reach tonight is a tiny bias on a tiny number inside a line of code, nothing you would point to in the sky and name. Still, the solver sees it, in principle, and keeps it accounted for along with other distant hands. We are not after drama. We are after balance. Let the room go quiet again. Chair backs ease. Fans lift a thin ribbon of warm air past the keyboard. Beyond the slit, The wind crosses the grass, and the grass forgives the wind. A kettle clicks and rests. Metal cools with a hush you only notice at this hour. In the station log, I write a short line about seeing and clouds and the way the focuser behaved. I cap the pen, cradle the thermos, and feel the steam meet the night. The screen still holds our scatter plot. The newest dot sits close enough to make the breath longer and the shoulders lower. The curve is not finished. It is closer. The color of the display seems to fade at the edges as if it were closing its eyes. We let the moment dissolve, and the numbers keep learning without us. Far out where the sun is a pale handprint and the planets are threads on a dark cloth, I let my gaze settle on the largest thread. It thickens as the view drifts inward. A muted amber glow gathers, not light you would see with eyes alone, but a presence you feel as weight in the numbers. The traveller we've been tracing is small against this scale, a mote in the beam, and Jupiter is the quiet beam itself. In the grammar of motion, mass writes the longest sentences. The giant does not hurry, does not announce itself. It merely is, and by being, it organizes the room. Closer now, the idea of a boundary comes into shape. We call it hill sphere, the region where Jupiter's gravity can dominate over the suns for tiny companions. It is not a wall or a fence. It is more like the hush around a speaker in a crowded gallery, the place where one voice carries better than others. The sphere is huge, tens of millions of kilometers across, but usefulness lives in nuance. Much of the influence happens well beyond a simple line. In practice, even outside that sphere, a traveller can feel a faint lean in its path from Jupiter's long reach. We keep the word reach small in our mouths. We use it to say influence, not control. As the view continues to slow zoom inward, another structure emerges, not a sphere, but an asymmetric shell that swells and trails like a windsock. Jupiter's magnetosphere, the largest in the solar system. On the day side, it can be compact, compressed by the solar wind. On the night side, it stretches into a far tail measured in astronomical units. Inside this invisible architecture flows a torus of plasma sourced by Eo's volcanoes, sulfur and oxygen ions, moving in locked rhythm with the planet's rotation. Juno and Galileo have read these rooms, with instruments tuned to fields and particles, revealing curtains of aurora, sheets of current, and places where charged dust chooses one path over another. For our traveller, mostly neutral and small, this is background weather, unless it sheds charged grains. Then the magnetosphere becomes more than scenery. Step closer, again, to the regime where tides whisper. Gravity is not uniform across a body. The near side feels a little more pull than the far side. For nearby moons, this difference raises oceans and strains ice. For fragile visitors, there exists a distance inside which these differences can pull a loosely held object apart. That boundary is a Roche limit, a number that depends on both the body's density and Jupiter's. Comets in our records have split when pushed by heat and spin alone. Others have broken under tides during deep approaches. None of this is a promise for the traveller we watch. It is simply part of the map. Quiet warnings stenciled in the margins for those who like their charts honest. And then the galleries open into 3 side rooms, each lit differently. Europa's room is gleaming and young, ice with fracture patterns like fresh varnish. Beneath it, evidence points to a global ocean in contact with rock, a configuration that makes chemistry busy even when the surface looks asleep. And that busyness is why we return to the idea, softly, again and again. Ganymede is larger and stranger, the only moon with a magnetic field of its own. Step into its room, and you are inside a bubble within the larger bubble, field lines nested like curved rails. Callisto is the old archive, shelves upon shelves of preserved events, a surface that has kept its records for ages without fuss, stoic and grainy, and considerate to things that fall upon it. Each room quiets you in a different way, and each leaves a low amber echo in the hall as you move past. Now let the sound drop to a near silence. The museum at night is a gentle place. A guard's shoes tap once on a far stair. An HVAC vent breathes, and the breath flows across the marble in a ribbon you can feel on your hands. The light from a frosted fixture paints a long oval on the floor, and dust in that oval decides to fall rather than float. In the Europa room, a small projector hums inside its housing and then rests. Somewhere behind a panel, a transformer ticks as if it were thinking. The air smells faintly of paper and metal and clean paint. If you stand still, the building teaches you by calm example how to stand still. For a minute, there is only the weight of the place and your breath, measured and kind. Back in the numbers, the scale of Jupiter reminds me that influence is often integral, not a single shove. A tiny acceleration felt for weeks matters more than a big one felt for a heartbeat. The traveller's projected line crosses longitudes and latitudes that make sense only because we define them. Yet the physics beneath the grid is indifferent to our names. If the path were to pass inside a broad zone where Jupiter's pull becomes a steady bias, a clean gravitational nudge could add or subtract a little speed, trade a little angular momentum, and leave the traveller angled differently than before. Most passes are clean, far, and ordinary. But even the idea of a mild near miss makes us set out clean notebooks, not because something must happen, because if something gentle does, it could be measured. So this is the room where our story takes its next breath. Not a prologue to a spectacle, not a corridor to alarm, only a patient gallery showing how a giant keeps order by being itself. The magnetosphere hums, the tides whisper, the moons hold their questions the way good exhibits do, stated plainly, never shouted. Whether our visitor stays in the outer lobby or crosses an inner rope line, the lesson is steady. Scale matters. Time matters. The sum of small terms matters. I switch off the desk lamp, and the low amber glow in my mind remains, like the after image of a trusted guide. That is enough to carry us forward. Breath from ice can move a world, a soft white plume that no one hears. The room holds still while the physics wakes. The kettle quiets, the mount purrs like a cat that has learned patience, and outside the slit the dark smells faintly of cold metal and damp dust. Air slips along the tube and doesn't complain. A moth writes a tiny loop, decides, and leaves. Somewhere in the grass, a night thing crosses from one intention to another without hurry. I keep my voice low and my hands warm around the cup. The traveller turns in sunlight far away, and on one sunlit patch, frost meets morning. A thread of vapour loosens, bright as chalk in my mind, then thins to nothing. The scene is small, the consequences are not. We breathe with it for a minute. Sublimation is simple and beautiful. Warm a patch of volatile ice, and it shifts straight to gas, lifting dust as it goes. The escaping flow carries momentum, and the nucleus answers with a whispering recoil. It is not a rocket in any cinematic sense. It is bellows and breath, patient and soft. Where light lingers, the plume lasts. Where shadow returns, the plume rests. Add a dozen such patches, each with its own timing, and the net force becomes the average of their small insistences. Our traveller, turning, offers each face to the day in turn. With every rotation, the soft white plume rephrases the same sentence, and the path listens. Rotation makes the story complicated in the friendliest way. If jets prefer certain longitudes, the thrust will strobe with the spin. A little push, a pause, a little push again. Those same jets twist as well as nudge. Over weeks, a nucleus can speed up or slow down by heartbeats. You can count if you are patient. Comets, we have known, change their day length by minutes across a season, not because anything dramatic broke, but because breath has torque. This is the quiet kind of machinery I love. It makes time and geometry shake hands. We've seen this class of small insistence before. The first interstellar visitor on our books, a long, faint object that left more questions than it brought, drifted off with a detectable non-gravitational acceleration, measured, argued over, and real. Another, more ordinary in appearance, wore a familiar comber and tail, and behaved like a newcomer comet should, shedding and surging as it rounded the sun. Neither was a message. Both were lessons. One showed that a tiny extra push can be teased from clean astrometry. The other reminded us that breath is normal when sunshine meets stored winter. Between them lies a spectrum of behavior our traveller may choose from without choosing at all. If a particular region stays more active because its texture is open, or its crust is thin, or its chemistry warms early, the sum of all that breath may tend to point the same way day after day. Spacecraft that have ridden alongside comets have mapped jet sources like neighborhoods, some noisy, some shy, some seasonal. Anisotropy is the plain word, not the same in every direction. Anisotropy is enough. Give it time, and the gentle pushes stop cancelling perfectly. A survivor direction appears, not bold, just patient. We do not pretend to know that our visitor owns such a region. We say only that nature permits the possibility and has played it before. What matters next is accumulation. A single second of a featherweight push is nothing. 100 hours is not nothing. Fold a force the size of a sigh into weeks, and you own a measurable change in speed. A centimetre per second is a humble number, yet across millions of seconds that little nudge becomes a shift, big enough to move a misdistance by thousands of kilometres. The math is as mild as the effect, and that is part of the reassurance. Small terms add, and they add honestly. If the plume strengthens as the sun draws nearer, the summer of the nucleus looks different than its spring. The curve answers quietly. Orbit solvers keep a shelf for such behavior. They write the Marsden non-gravitational terms into the equations. A1 along the sun line, A2 along the velocity, A3 perpendicular to the plane. Then test whether the residuals calm down. We do not fit them because we like the story. We fit them because the dots ask us to. A spurious parameter will flatter yesterday and betray tomorrow. A sound one will keep tomorrow almost as tidy as today. If a small A2 holds over new nights, we are not surprised. We are simply careful and grateful for tools that make room for breath in a universe full of gravity. Composition, rotation, and sunlight conspire kindly here, because ices do not all wake at the same temperature, surfaces are not uniformly tight, Seasons play across tilted axes, and porous grains soak and vent heat at their own unhurried pace, so the plumes can favour one ridge or hollow, long enough to build a sliver of steady push that leans the trajectory without ever raising its voice. There is no intention in any of it. A traveller with more carbon dioxide than water ice will begin murmuring sooner, farther from the sun. A traveller with a crust that fractures into a few vents instead of many will show stronger personality in its breath. None of these differences violate the rules we keep. They add texture to our forecasts. When we propagate the path forward, we test cases with small a terms and cases without. Sometimes the two futures separate by a distance you would call trivial in human life and meaningful in celestial mechanics. A near that remains millions of kilometers wide is still near enough for our instruments to care. This is where the lantern dims, softly. The practical thing is to keep watching, to let the plume, if there is one, speak for itself in light curves and residuals, and to let the numbers decide if breath belongs in the model today or must wait for a closer sun tomorrow. I take one last look at the screen, and the curve on it looks content with its own company. The dome exhales. The air tastes clean. The bellows of sunlight and ice working in silence on a body as small as a town and as old as anything we've ever measured will continue whether we listen or sleep. We can choose sleep. The lantern's circle shrinks and the room agrees. What does it mean when two lines on a plot drift close, almost touch, then slide apart again? We call it a coincidence, but the word is softer than the work beneath it. A number says the nearness is rare. Another number says how sure we are about that first number. Both are useful. Neither is destiny. In this chapter, I keep the tone even and the scale honest, because rarity is not a message. It is a property of how wide the universe is and how small our sample still feels. Probability is a grammar for uncertainty, not a drum roll. In one dialect, we ask, if the world were this simple model, how surprising would our data be? In another, we ask, given the data and our prior understanding, which ranges of futures now look more reasonable? Both dialects belong in astronomy's toolkit. They stop us from telling the sky what to do, and instead let the sky nudge our beliefs, one gentle bit at a time. A low fraction does not argue for meaning. It argues for caution and for better measurements. To picture the work, imagine we make thousands of quiet copies of the traveller's state, clones that differ by tiny amounts allowed by the present uncertainties. We let each copy run forward under gravity, and, if the data ask for it, under a small outgassing term as well. For every copy, we record the closest approach to Jupiter in the model. Then we count. Perhaps most pass far outside any region of particular interest. Perhaps a small handful enter a wide window, say, distances measured in many millions of kilometers rather than billions. That handful does not shout. It suggests where to point telescopes, which nights to protect, which instruments might see a signal worth the trouble. Scale matters here. Jupiter's sphere of practical influence is huge, but near in celestial mechanics is not the near of a car's headlight or a walk to the kitchen. If a clone's path threads within tens of millions of kilometers, that is still a gulf we cannot visualize on a map pinned to a wall. Yet, it can be close enough for a steady gravitational nudge to change the traveller's speed, by a hair and rotate its outgoing direction by a degree measured at a desk, not with eyes. That kind of near is interesting, not perilous. It helps to separate two clean ideas that often blur together in casual talk. Capture is when an object loses enough energy to become bound to Jupiter, looping for a while as a moonlet before leaving or settling. Without some way to shed energy, tidal heating, gas drag, or a very particular three-body choreography, capture is hard. A gravity assist is different. It is a flyby that trades energy and direction with the moving planet, leaving the traveler on a new heliocentric path without any loss of total energy in the larger system. The assist is a handshake. The capture is a slow embrace. Most visitors get the handshake. Almost none earn the embrace. So when the plot shows two lines nearly kiss, our traveller's projected curve and a swathe of Jupiter's broader reach, the practical question is simple and kind. What could we learn if that almost meeting happened in a range where an instrument might notice a change? We might measure a small correction to speed that clarifies the outgassing story. We might refine how much the non-gravitational term bends the line compared with a clean Newtonian path. We might test whether the brightness curve flutters as the traveller's rotation phases through vents. This is why scientists care about a window that to human intuition feels vast. Within that window, subtle truths get leverage. The Monte Carlo image remains useful because it resists storytelling. If a few out of 10,000 futures enter the wide window, we do not crown the window as fate. We tag it as a place to watch, and we let the next week's astrometry decide whether that fraction rises, falls, or holds. Sometimes it dissolves with better data, a page we turn without regret. Sometimes it sharpens, and the narrowness of the chance makes the observation plan tighter, not louder. Either way, we are reading the curve, not writing it. There is a way to breathe while looking at numbers, and I try to keep that rhythm. The traveller is not aiming. Jupiter is not calling. The curves meet, or do not meet, because lines, masses, and time add up to a geometry that unfolds whether we watch or sleep. A small A2 term, if it persists, can walk the misdistance across that window by thousands of kilometers over weeks. If it fades, the window empties of interest by itself. Nothing about that shift demands alarm. It asks for patience, for a good ephemeris, and for coffee brewed without hurry. Let's hold an example in the palm of the hand. Suppose a no-breath fit predicts a miss many tens of millions of kilometers wide, and a with-breath fit predicts a miss that is a little smaller or a little larger by a few %. Neither scenario implies a close pass in the human sense. Both suggest a tiny change in the leaving angle, the kind of change that, when propagated for months, becomes a slightly different sky path for the object as it exits the neighborhood. That difference helps distinguish between breath is present and breath is negligible, a science result that fits in a sentence and satisfies by its restraint. Rarity does something else that is quiet and helpful. It focuses the community. A window that is unlikely but not absurd invites shared calendars, observatories that trade nights, small telescopes that contribute honest photometry, and larger ones that attempt trickier spectra. The point is not to chase a spectacle. It is to improve the record of how this traveller behaved under sunlight near a giant's reach so that the next traveller meets a better prepared welcome. This is how fields mature, not with fireworks, but with curves made tidier by practice. We turn the page without flourish. The coincidence window is neither omen nor plot twist. It is a reminder that wide spaces can contain subtle meetings, and that subtle meetings can teach. I set the pencil down, let the shoulders drop, and let the thought of lines nearly touching become a calm place rather than a cliff. The next chapter waits. The paper feels warm from the lamp. We move on, slow and rested, to what a window of time does to the work. Morning begins in someone else's night. I hand the target to a colleague west of me, sleep a little, then wake with the sun and a short list. Weather pages first. Wind at summit, precipitable water, jet stream wobble, moon phase, then calendars, queue requests, classical nights, a sliver of twilight the small scope can steal if the horizon behaves. Around noon, ephemerides update. The traveller's line shifts by a hair, and with it the forecast air mass for each site, the angle through which the atmosphere will ask our light to swim. None of this is dramatic. All of it is the narrow bridge we walk when a season is short and the sky is busy. By late afternoon, I'm marking windows. Air mass below 2 is friendly. Below 1.5 feels like courtesy from the universe. Seeing is a number with moods. Sometimes it likes to be a single decimal place. Sometimes it is a paragraph disguised as a digit. Thin cloud is worse than thick. Dangerous because it whispers, "You're fine," while stealing contrast grain by grain. We set limits and promise to keep them. A clean night of nothing is kinder than a stack of almosts. The dome crews have learned this lesson twice already this month, once under Saharan dust and once under a low deck that could not make up its mind. Patience is not a virtue here, it's a tool. Brightness rises and falls under rules we can predict and rules we can only respect. Geometry alone brightens a bare nucleus. The closer to the sun, the more sunlight. The smaller the distance to us, the stronger the reflection. But active bodies add a different rhythm. Dust scatters light forward and sideways in ways that depend on the angle between sun, traveller, and telescope, the phase angle. A small change in that angle can make a large change in apparent brightness, especially when the dust prefers to glitter in one direction. Opposition surges near small angles, forward scattering at larger ones. The words are tidy. The sky is subtle. So we do not plan on brightness. We plan on ranges, and we leave room for surprise from the coma's texture. Fragmentation is not a monster at the door. It is more like an old squeak in the floorboards that sometimes becomes a crack. Comets have come apart gently and not so gently. One split and returned in a litter of shards that paraded down the sky like a family reunion. Another brightened, stuttered, and then melted into a smudge that would no longer hold a point. We remember a string of pearls torn by tides near a giant, and we remember smaller bodies that simply couldn't keep their spin and heat in the same agreement any longer. Our traveller might stay whole, might shed a scarf of pieces, might blur. Any of these can happen without spectacle. Any can fold learning into the light curve and the residuals, and any can shorten our window without asking our permission. Mid-chapter, let the room fall into a gentle weave. The door latch clicks once, and then aligns. Far away, a snowplow you'll never see lays down a line of white noise, steady and polite. The kettle raises a single pearl of steam and resigns. A glove someone forgot in spring loses another breath of cold to the air. Down the hill, A dog announces a fox, and the fox disagrees. Frost meets the lip of a concrete step and takes its time letting go. The scent that lives between solder and dust lifts when the computer fans turn just a little faster. If you blink long and slow, you can feel the eyelids closing like theatre curtains. And in that half-light, the mind sets the tripod of attention down, extends the legs until they click, and steps back. Back at the bench, we ask which data are worth the hour. A broadband image gives position and a brightness that can live in a plot. A narrowband spectrum gives the breath itself, lines that whisper this much cyanide, this much carbon monoxide, this much water, if the weather drifts kind. Under a bright moon, we favour astrometry. Under a new moon, we reach for the chemistry we cannot buy any other way. The fast telescope in Chile takes the faintest structure in the coma. The Wide-Field Survey in Hawaii picks up the traveller when others need time to slew. None of us can do everything. All of us can do enough, together, that the curve we keep is not lonely. Spacecraft drift through the conversation like thoughtful elders. One circles Jupiter now, in the long ellipse of a mission that was not built to chase passerby. Its fuel is an accounting we respect, its instruments tuned to winds and fields, not to unexpected visitors. Another is on its way for a grand tour of 3 frozen rooms in that museum of a system. Its date with the giant's household sits beyond this season, and so it cannot help with our traveller except by reminding us how much a close look can change a life of questions. A third will spend its years knifing through radiation belts to read the young ice of a specific world, not tonight, not next year, but in a decade, shaped by choices already made. Missions have tempos that cannot be forced to sprint. We plan with the hands we have. The clock asks us to choose, and we answer with lists. If the traveller brightens faster than geometry can explain, fibre-fed spectrographs win the night. If it dims, we double down on precise positions to catch any bend, in the path that breath might be hiding. If clouds sit heavy but thin, we run a cadence of short exposures across the rotation period to watch for a heartbeat in the light that betrays shape. The rule is soft but firm. Fewer things done well. The temptation is always to add one more line to the request email, one more target of opportunity clause. We decline the temptation as an act of kindness to the future us, who must reduce the data when the caffeine is gone. There is comfort in the wall clock's indifference. You cannot make the sky move faster or the earth turn slower, so you fit your breathing to the length of the night. When windows shrink, when storm weeks eat a calendar page, when dust from far away makes stars look like pennies seen through milk, we write no in the log with the same neat hand that writes yes on clear nights. The habit protects the mind, and it teaches something simple that experts sometimes forget. A missed hour is not a failure. It is the cost of pursuing true small things in a patient universe. By the time midnight slides past, we have a plan to carry the traveller across dawn. We have promised ourselves that if it fragments, we will observe politely, not demand spectacle from a tender process. We have admitted that spacecraft cannot turn on a dime, and that telescopes cannot divide themselves to serve every curiosity at once. We have rehearsed how geometry can brighten a dust halo, and how it can also lie to us about activity, if we forget the phase angles tricks. The only thing left is to sit with the night while it does its work, Out above the poles of the giant, we've been careful not to dramatize. Curtains move where charged particles braid into light. I think of those curtains when a high cloud sheet passes our dome and thins again, a quiet aurora drifting in our own small sky. It is a good place to pause. On the bench, a tray of glass vials, each with a small pale label. A wheel of filters, cool to the touch. A spectrum pinned like a ribbon of rain, with lines that rise where certain molecules hum. A slate-coloured notebook open to a tidy page. A thermos, a pencil. The night. The traveller is far, and yet part of it arrives here as faint chemistry. I picture a winter pantry. Jars of water ice, of carbon dioxide, of carbon monoxide, tucked on different shelves. Some open easily with a little warmth. Some wait for deeper seasons. Unscrewing any one lid adds a new scent to the room, and the air's motion shifts by a breath you can feel. In the data, that breath has a shape. Water is the jar most of us reach for first, but it is not always the first to wake. Far from the sun, patches rich in carbon dioxide can begin to whisper before water stirs. Their gas drifts out through pores and fractures, lifting dust, tinting the coma's behavior, and nudging the path with a soft insistence. Close in. Water joins in earnest, and the blend changes again, like a spice that was background. Stepping forward when the soup warms. The relative voices matter because each one carries momentum differently. Each one brightens the traveller's veil in its own way. We read that veil by how it scatters light, and the reading is gentle work. The faint green thread that sometimes runs through a comet's halo is not a promise, only a chemistry lesson. Diatomic carbon shining under sunlight makes a glow our eyes call green. Cyanide fragments add their own signature in violet blue. Radicals form and vanish as light breaks and remakes bonds in the thin air around the nucleus. We do not chase colour, we confirm it with lines. A narrowband filter isolates one family of molecules. A grating spreads them. A detector counts with patience while the mount keeps time. The point is not a photograph. The point is a ledger entry. This much of the species tonight, under this geometry, with this weather. Strung together, those entries tell a quiet story of where the pantry jars sat on the shelves when the traveller was built. Not all recipes start with the same ingredients. A few comets we have met seemed almost dominated by carbon monoxide, a cold-blooming gas that sustains activity far from the sun. Others have surprised with strong carbon dioxide relative to water. Still others carry ordinary ratios near mid-distance and then shift when illumination favors a rougher patch. Spacecraft that flew close have taught us how uneven a nucleus can be. Some neighborhoods vent easily, some wear crusts that make their breath slow. On one famous, lumpy world, carbon dioxide sometimes carried tiny grains like confetti, while water lifted gentler dust and let it fall in a different pattern. Chemistry is a path through texture. Texture is a path through motion. When the traveller's breath contains more of one volatile than another, it does not violate any rule. It enriches the forecast. Carbon dioxide begins to speak at lower sunlight than water does, carbon monoxide earlier still. A nucleus rich in those jars may become active sooner, from farther away. And if the vents that favour those gases cluster on a patch of the surface, the net push can lean in a repeatable way. Then the numbers turn from the pantry to the roadmap. If small non-gravitational terms belong in the fit, a compositional tilt explains why. We phrase it softly. The molecules do what their temperatures require. The path follows the sum of their whispers. Beyond the core trio of ices live the little names that matter: HCN, H2CO, CH3OH, NH3. Each gives a spectral line or a band that, once noticed, becomes a recurring acquaintance. Cyanide fragments under sunlight to make the CN emission we measure by habit. Formaldehyde and methanol help sketch the carbon budget. Ammonia is a quiet mover in nitrogen's story. Radio dishes find the longer waves where some of these rotate. Optical telescopes catch their shorter signatures. Space-based instruments step around the atmosphere's own breath to see the lines the ground cannot. Each detection is a dot. A few dots make a phrase. We collect phrases, not slogans. Every season brings a few lines we can't place. They sit in the spectrum like guests we ought to know but cannot name, and they keep their seats with dignity while we search catalogues. Some will find a home next year when a lab measurement confirms a candidate transition at just the right energy. Some will remain unidentified far longer, a reminder that a nucleus is less a single thing and more a region where chemistry has been busy for a long time under conditions we can only sketch. The important part is not to make those lines mean more than they can bear. Mystery is allowed to be a pencil mark, not a flag. And then there is the metal that keeps appearing where we did not expect it. A trace in the cold where iron would have seemed more likely if anything at all were to be noticed. Under careful eyes and long exposures, atom-scale nickel has been found in Comets. Yes, in familiar comets, and yes, even in the visitor we met years ago, who announced its origin by the openness of its orbit. The amounts are tiny, the detections conservative, the explanations still a field of mild debate. Perhaps certain compounds release nickel atoms gently even in weak warmth. Perhaps grain chemistry separates cousins that we thought always travelled together. None of this asks us to leave the ordinary. It asks us to broaden it. Late in the hour, let the room rest. The spectrograph hums in its insulated box, a baritone so low you feel it more than hear it. The coolant tick builds a rhythm, and then stops. A red LED on the floor finds a dust mote and discovers it is a small planet. Paper smells like winter. A street lamp beyond the observatory fence throws a rectangle on gravel where no one is walking. A moth crosses the rectangle once, checks its work, and declines a second pass. The kettle keeps its lid down and pretends to be thinking. Somewhere under the desk, a cable remembers the warmth of a hand and cools again. The mind notices the green phantom behind your eyelids when you blink, not as a colour, but as a temperature, a little warmer than black. Then the phantom lets go. Candles do this when they refuse to gutter. Back at the page, the lesson is close to the ground. Chemistry drives breath. Breath nudges motion. Motion feeds back on what sunlight touches next. A dusty veil grown in carbon dioxide can scatter differently than one grown in water alone. That scatter makes brightness change with the angle between sun, traveller, and us. And that change, if mistaken for an outburst, can lead us to overfit the path and then regret it when new data arrive. So we bring the pantry and the map into the same sentence. We count the lines, we watch the light curve. We let the model ask for small A terms only if they hold for nights yet to come. We keep the faint green thread as a metaphor, not a headline. And when the shift from ice to gas feels like a candle's breath in a quiet room, we take the hint and end the chapter the way a wick goes dark, cleanly, without smoke. 3 panels, lit softly. In the first, a pane of blue-white with hairline fractures that look new. In the second, a darker circle with lines of force sketched invisibly through the air. In the third, an old face of ice and dust, every mark a kept memory. I stand at the edge of these rooms and let the scale lower my voice. The traveller we follow may never touch them, may never even skim their widest weather, yet their presence teaches us how a system holds its questions. The soft blue pane is Europa, the nested field is Ganymede, the quiet archive is Callisto. Europa first, not because it is loud, but because it refuses to stay still in the mind. Its surface looks young by comparative standards. Few craters, many double ridges, swaths of chaos where blocks of ice seem to have floated and refrozen like tilted panes in a winter river. Beneath that, evidence points to a global ocean in contact with rock, implied by magnetic signatures that appear and reverse as Jupiter's field sweeps by. A conductor moves there, salted and deep. Now and then, distant instruments have seen hints of vapour near the limb, whispers that could be plumes, cautioned always by the limits of the method. If the traveller's dust ever found a way to settle here, it would settle into an environment that recycles its own skin, mixed down, reworked, then returned. Nothing about that idea needs drama. It needs patience and a notebook. Ganymede answers differently. Larger than Mercury and far more intricate, it carries a magnetic field of its own. The only moon that does, carve in a pocket inside Jupiter's magnetic sea. Auroras ripple along its poles, and their small rocking under Jupiter's field has been used to argue for layers of conductive water inside, stratified like shelving in a deep pantry. The surface shows bright, grooved terrains stitched beside darker, older patches. A story of tensions and releases played at glacial tempos. A traveller's dust, if it reached this room, would pass first through a local field, interacting with a geometry nested within a larger geometry. That nesting is part of the fascination. It's a bubble within a bubble. A material charged by sunlight or plasma may take paths that curve twice before they rest. Callisto keeps the oldest diary. Its crust is heavily cratered and has not hurried to erase those marks. Even the big basins hold their age with quiet pride. Beneath, magnetometer hints suggest a deep, cold ocean may still exist, insulated by ice so thick that tides move it more as a thought than a wave. There is little sign of tectonic renewal near the surface, so exogenic material that lands here tends to remain as laid, sputtered by radiation, weathered by time, but not bulldozed under. If the traveller's grains ever arrived, Callisto would keep them in the front of the book, not the glossary. Archive is the right word. Between these rooms flows a weather you cannot see. Jupiter's magnetosphere co-rotates the space around it, sweeping up ions from Io's volcanoes into a broad torus and shepherding charged dust along electric fields that would look like curved rails if only eyes could see them. Neutral grains ride inertia. Charged grains feel the fields and trace loops and drifts that depend on their sizes, charges, and the changing wind from the sun. Europa's trailing hemisphere bears the marks of this circulation, a seasoning of sulfur and other products that likely arrived from neighbours and from the giant's own belts. The traffic is constant, mostly gentle. The stage is never empty. Imagine, quietly, a contribution from far away. A small fraction of the traveller's dust escapes as the body warms and exhales. Much of that dust simply leaves. Some subset, if it wanders into Jupiter's reach while charged by sunlight or plasma, may feel the system's fields long enough to change pace, direction, or both. A portion could be trapped briefly, only to drift out again. Another portion might lose energy and settle into the thin flows that paint the moon's uppermost grains. These are not deliveries, they are meetings. The scale of distance keeps the numbers modest, and the time constants slow the drama into something worth reading without blinking. Now let the scene fall into a still weave. The room's fan leans a ribbon of air across the floor, and the paper on the clipboard agrees. A far train places a soft baritone under the building and moves on. Fluorescent ballasts hum like bees that have forgotten why they gathered. A mug rests on cork and keeps its heat. The line where ceramic meets sleeve is warm, in a way your fingers remember from winters that were kind. Somewhere beyond the fence, a fox edits a path through frost, and the frost does not object. The light inside the spectrograph is a red planet behind smoked glass, and a dust mote floats through its orbit with a patience that makes clocks feel self-conscious. Breath in 4, hold for 4, out for 6. The panels wait without counting. Back at the bench, the question is how such meetings would show themselves, if at all. Europa's surface carries oxygen made by sputtering. Faint atmospheres of molecules and atoms gather and disperse with sunlight and magnetospheric weather. A tiny extra peppering of external dust could slightly change the way certain regions reflect or emit, giving a spectral hint that would be hard to prove and satisfying precisely because it is small. Ganymede's auroras might dance with the same steps, but grains settling there would do so through a local field that filters by charge and size. Callisto would keep what it catches near the top millimeter for ages, a slow scrapbook under radiation. None of this requires our visitor to approach closely, only that a vast room contains many currents, and that travelers sometimes cross the outermost ones. Instruments already planned favor such subtlety. One spacecraft will fly repeated, careful paths near Europa, reading the ice, the fields, the tenuous gases, and the way particles move around the moon's immediate room. Another will tour the system and make a long home near Ganymede, bringing magnetometers, spectrometers, imagers that know how to listen. Ground-based telescopes will add their patience from far away, comparing one season to another, trailing hemisphere to leading, quiet day to disturbed. If any contribution from a distant traveller exists, it will not announce itself. It will make researchers argue in good faith about tiny differences, and whether they belong to chemistry, to sunlight, or to chance. That is a healthy argument to have. I like to end this panel walk by stepping back until all 3 rooms sit together again. Blue pane, nested field, old archive. The imagined grains, if they ever arrived, would lodge in different ways because the rooms themselves are different. The system does not need a story to be interesting. It needs time and light and the gentle movements of charged and neutral dust through a field too large to see. I listen to that field the way I listen to a shoreline at night, not for a single wave, but for the hush that comes from all the waves together. The hush is steady. It holds while we sleep. There is a shelf in my mental museum where careful ideas live under soft light. Each sits in a cardboard tray with a cotton pad, a handwritten label, and a promise not to rush the story. Panspermia belongs on that shelf. I keep it there as a quiet sidebar, not a headline. The label reads simply, transport of chemistry, perhaps even hardy microbes between worlds by natural means. No trumpets, no winks, just an index card that says, maybe, not now. I lift the tray with both hands, glance at the contents, and set it down again near the bench where our other instruments wait. What this word doesn't mean matters as much as what it does. It does not mean intention. It does not mean messages tucked into ice. It does not mean that every organic trace we see is a fingerprint of life. In its modest form, it says something smaller and sturdier. That space is not empty of chemistry, that rocks and dust and comets travel, that impacts are generous scatterers, that molecules can ride along in darkness for long intervals, that some will land on other worlds where heat, water, and time may or may not greet them kindly. As a frame, it is permissive, but not presumptive. It tells us to look for evidence, not for drama. Evidence exists for the simple parts. Meteorites that fell to Earth carry amino acids and nuclear base relatives whose isotopes give them away as extraterrestrial. Comets have shown us volatile organics and even glycine, an amino acid caught by spacecraft and seen in the thin breath around a nucleus. Phosphorus has appeared there too, the kind used in life's energy traffic on our world. Telescopes have found sugars and nitriles in star-forming regions and young disks, hints that the pantry of carbon chemistry is stocked early and often. None of these detections demand life. They only demonstrate that the ingredients are common and wander freely. That is already a generous lesson. A harder part asks whether anything more delicate than a molecule can travel intact. Rocks can shield microbes, in principle, from some radiation and heat, if the trip and the landing are gentle enough. Experiments on and beyond the atmosphere have tested the survival of hardy spores and small organisms, and some have endured for months to years in partial protection, a result that opens a door without promising what lies behind it. Most travellers would not last. A few might. This is the right size of answer for the museum shelf. Neither love song nor dismissal. Or bring that shelf back into the room where our traveller crosses the outer lanes of Jupiter's domain. If a little of its dust joins the broad weather of co-rotating plasma and fields, the chemistry it carries could, in theory, mix, briefly, with the flows that dust from Io, and elsewhere already ride. From there, grains might wander to the surfaces of Europa, or Ganymede, or Callisto, to be sputtered, dissolved, or simply kept. Macromolecules would have a hard life in that radiation, but some fraction could bury themselves shallowly in clean ice, or lodge in darker coatings and wait for ages measured by patience rather than plot. This is no more than a meeting of currents. It is not a delivery, and certainly not a design. What would we do with such a possibility? We would not make declarations. We would take spectra of surfaces and tenuous atmospheres over many seasons. We would compare leading and trailing hemispheres, quiet days and disturbed days, fresh frost and older regolith. We would argue gently about tiny differences, and whether they belong to sulfur, to sunlight, to charged dust, or to something we cannot yet name. We would try to reproduce those differences in the lab, with mixtures and grain sizes and temperatures that remember a moon's actual night. And we would accept that most answers arrive as ranges, not as single numbers. The larger story remains local to data. Panspermia in its careful sense says chemistry moves. We confirm that with each meteorite we crack and each spectrum we pass. It also says that worlds may exchange not just heat and light, but material, especially in times of heavier bombardment or in families of moons swept by a giant's invisible wind. That fits the Jupiter system as a matter of daily weather. Whether a traveller from another star joins that weather for a while is a question of geometry, and timing, and luck. If it does, the contribution is likely tiny, folded into other exogenic flavors that already season ice and rock. Tiny is enough to be interesting. Tiny is what our instruments are best at. When talk drifts from chemistry to life, I bring the bell jar closer and lower it a little. Life is a collection of constraints that molecules alone do not fulfill. It wants gradients of energy, cycles of wet and dry, surfaces that catalyze and compartments that separate. It wants noise without chaos. On Europa, or in a warm pocket of porous ice, some of those pieces may exist, and separate lines of work will test those possibilities with missions designed for that job. Our traveller's role in such a story, if any, would be as background spice, not as seed. That distinction matters because it keeps us honest about what our data can support. Let's step away from the shelf and back to the main lane. The work at hand is still what we named before: measure light, measure motion, model small breaths, compare with and without those breaths. Watch how a line tightens or relaxes as Jupiter's influence accumulates. Keep our words small enough to match the size of our knowledge. If some gentle coincidence draws material from far away into a system already rich with circulation, we will be ready to notice a difference of a percent here, a whisper of a line there. If no such meeting occurs, the record we make will still be useful, because it'll show what this traveller did under its own sunlit physics, and that record makes the next traveller less of a stranger. I keep the tray on the shelf with a label facing outward. The label is neat, the corners square. A thin bell glass settles over it with a soft touch, not to silence the idea, but to keep dust from pretending to be evidence. We leave the room as we found it, instruments tidy, notes legible, minds steady. Outside, frost lifts a little under a late moon. Inside, we close the drawer with a click that is as much a promise as a sound. Step 1, a clean pass. Step 2, a brief resonance. Step 3, a quiet break. 3 doors in low light, each opening to a different room where the same traveller moves with different grace. I keep my voice level and my hands out of the picture. We will walk through each door, feel the air, and note what a careful observer might bring home. The fork is soft, not a cliff. Door 1, the clean pass. In this room, the geometry stays simple. The traveller crosses the outskirts of Jupiter's reach, feels a steady tug that grows and fades like a tide on a long beach, and leaves on a slightly different heading. Heliocentric energy changes only by the handshake the flyby allows. No drama, no capture, only a careful exchange between a moving planet and a passing mote. The measurable thing is modest. A small rotation of the outgoing velocity vector, a barely different speed, the kind of change that moves a future ephemeris by a fraction here, a fraction there. In such passages, we test whether the breath we modelled earlier truly belongs. The gravity-only fit predicts one leaving angle, the with-breath fit predicts another. And if the sky prefers one, the numbers learn it. A clean pass teaches restraint while still letting us weigh small forces. Door 2, the brief resonance. This is not a moonhood, not a stable membership in the giant's household. It is a loop or two in a zone where periods match just enough to borrow time from departure. Some small bodies have dallied this way in great systems, lingering as if they had questions, then finding their exit when the arithmetic permits. Dynamics here are gentle but intricate. The traveller may spend extra days in a corridor where Jupiter's regular pull aligns with the traveller's changing phase, the way a swing takes bigger arcs if the pushes come at the right moments. More time near the giant means more chances for breath to matter, more chances for light curves to map rotation, and more leverage to separate a model with A terms from a model without. Even if the loop is only wide and slow, its existence makes the notebook thicker. It is the resonance that leaves a watermark rather than a headline. Door 3. The quiet break. Fragmentation is a word that sounds sharp. In practice, it can be courteous. A crust tires, a seam opens, a part of the nucleus loosens its grip on the rest and slides away at walking speed. The pieces keep company for a while, then drift. We have seen families of shards parade along a shared track like beads on thread. We have seen chains untied by tides near a giant, and then stitched down again by gravity into brief trains. In our traveller's case, a soft break would change the light curve, add secondary peaks, alter the way residuals behave as the centre of brightness shifts relative to the centre of mass. The gas may change its blend, dust may thicken or thin. Nothing here demands spectacle. It demands that we measure in quiet and let the story emerge from the patient sums. Early in the walk, let the room breathe. The fan draws a ribbon of air across the keyboard, the paper accepts it, and the pencil's shadow shortens by a millimetre. Far down the hill, a snowplough leaves a steady tone under the world. A red LED glows like a coal, and then remembers it is plastic and settles. The kettle's lid lifts half a grain and sets down again. Somewhere a hinge decides not to squeak. The mind holds 3 doors at once, like cards fanned in a calm hand, and feels the soft fork in the path without choosing. Back in the room of the clean pass, the signs are quiet. A slight change in tail angle as the solar wind geometry shifts with the new trajectory. A slow drift in the phase of the rotation light curve if outgassing torques answer the altered sunlight schedule. Spectra that show the same lines as last week, but in ratios that admit either a small change in breath or a small change in dust scattering. The best tool here is precision ephemeris work before and after the encounter, the way a tailor tests whether a seam has taken by running a finger along it and feeling the grain. In the resonance room, the signs widen. Extra time in Jupiter's neighbourhood means extra samples of the same faces turning to the sun. We could pick out a fundamental period in the brightness with more confidence, catch harmonics that betray shape, and see whether gas lines rise and fall with the same rhythm or prefer different beats. The coma might grow asymmetries that persist for more than one rotation, a reminder that vents are neighbourhoods with habits, not random fireworks. If the loop keeps the traveller under similar phase angles for longer, the dust-scattering dance might stay in one favourite pose, making small changes easier to spot. It's not a trap. It's a pause that lets us listen. In the quiet break room, the signs split. The centre of light may wander relative to the orbit solution. Faint companions may trail by seconds or minutes of arc, each with its own small breath. The slope of the brightness curve may soften into steps. Spectra could add grain signatures if fresh surfaces expose new mixtures. If the fragments are firm, they will depart together with dignity. If they are frail, they will blur into a thicker veil and fold back into the main halo. Under our remote eyes, all of this is a set of tiny adjustments, not a show. The lesson is that a traveller's interior writes itself onto the sky in lowercase. What do the three rooms teach in common? That small changes in speed and angle, whether from gravity alone, from breath, or from a rearranged body, propagate into the future with long arms. A degree here, a centimetre per second there, and months later, the object is in a slightly different place than it would have been. That difference is how we measure forces we cannot touch and structures we cannot visit. It is also how we prepare for the next traveller, by lowering the noise floor until whispers are legible. We write a final page for the night with the signs to watch. Light curves, for rhythm, for splits, for new companions hiding under the beat. Coma shape, for a symmetry that tracks rotation, for jets that refuse to smear, for a tail that takes a new angle after the pass. Spectra, for lines that brighten or dim together, or misbehave in ways that point to texture rather than yield. Astrometry, for that faint, persistent preference the residuals keep trying to tell her about. None of these asks the sky for drama. We ask only for honesty and enough nights to let small truths accumulate. The three doors close with soft latches. The fork remains, but we do not grip it. If the traveller chooses the clean pass, we will weigh the handshake. If it lingers in a resonance, we will use the time. If it parts quietly, we will measure the grace of that, too. The night has carried us far enough for now. The pencil rests. The room dims. Cut. On the bench, a lamplight circle over a folded star atlas, a cue-form clipped to a board, a laptop with 3 tabs open to telescopes under other skies, a pouch of hex keys, a lint-free cloth, and a small ticking meter that is really a clock. Tools, but mostly choices. Who can see what and when? The big mirrors gather faintness and turn it into detail. In the optical and near-infrared, high-resolution spectrographs split the traveller's breath into lines. Medium-resolution instruments catch wider bands and move faster. Images harvest shape, coma, jets, tail, and the way all of that changes with geometry. Non-sidereal tracking keeps the visitor centered as stars slide by. Q mode lets a brief clear patch become data. Classical nights let patients have a room. We match instrument to question and accept that every choice costs something else. Under that lamplight, names matter less than bands and behaviors. A very large telescope with a crisp blue to red spectrograph reads CN and C2 when the sky cooperates. A twin on another mountain reaches deeper into the red and near IR for H2O emissions and warm dust glow. Wide-field survey telescopes sweep large areas and catch faint motion when the rest of us sleep. Narrower fields drill down and watch the halo's structure. Polarimeters listen to the way light scatters off rough grains and tell us about size. In all cases, the target's brightness sets the floor, the atmosphere sets the ceiling, and the calendar slides the whole window left or right. If the traveller brightens, we trade exposure time for cadence. If it dims, we accept fewer, longer looks. The benchlight hums. The meter ticks. There is a radio on the far shelf that speaks in centimeters and meters, but comets rarely answer it kindly. Planetary radar has mapped asteroids with exquisite relief. Comets are trickier. Their comae scatter and absorb, their nuclei are dark, and the distances that make radar sing are short and rare. When geometry smiles, a massive dish can catch a whisper in the echo and pin down a size or a spin, sometimes a hint of shape. Goldstone keeps that craft alive. An older giant did once, and its silence makes the room feel larger. Radar is a tool we don't count on for this traveller, but it sits on the bench anyway, because some doors are worth nudging even when they rarely open. If a window appears, we will know how to aim. Another shelf holds the millimeter and sub-millimeter gear in our minds, the arrays that read cold lines where rotational transitions speak. There, carbon monoxide is eloquent. Hydrogen cyanide and formaldehyde join in. Methanol hums softly in multiple places along the dial. With many dishes acting as one, we can resolve where gases rise and fade across the coma, tie variations to rotation, and see whether vents prefer certain longitudes. The weather above those dishes matters as much as in the optical. Precipitable water decides whether the faintest lines lift above the noise. Schedules are puzzles. Calibrators need their time. An hour here can be worth many nights elsewhere. There is no guarantee in any of it, only sensitivity, patience. Still, when a line appears where it should, the satisfaction is clean and deep. Spacecraft sit off to the side like elders at the workbench, hands folded, listening. One loops around Jupiter in a tall, radiation-tough ellipse, reading fields, particles, auroras, and the deep microwave warmth of the planet. Its instruments can glance outward only within their design. Its fuel is a solemn ledger. Its timeline is set. Two more are committed to tours that center on the moons, not on passers-by, and their arrival seasons live years ahead of our present night. We do not second-guess those choices. We let them remind us that missions breathe in decades, and that surprises belong to ground eyes for now. If a geometry happens to put a spacecraft's sensor near a useful angle, that is a gift. If not, we keep our bench in order and our requests modest. The quiet backbone of a campaign is not the mountain. It is the long chain of small telescopes with honest clocks. Backyard rigs with good tracking and clean flats. School observatories with a patient grad. Regional domes that can devote 3 hours to a light curve on a Tuesday. These carry the rotation signal when the big mirrors are oversubscribed, fill gaps when the weather is patchy, and give the solver astrometry that shrinks the fog more than pride would guess. Because cadence matters as much as aperture when the question is timing, and because dozens of clean, small measurements stitched across longitudes make a rhythm the sky cannot fake, and we cannot buy any other way. Late, the room falls into a night weave. The benchlight narrows its halo and warms a circle in the wood. A dehumidifier clicks alive and then settles into a low, companionable hum. Outside the slit, the wind goes somewhere else for a minute, and in its place the building's slow respiration becomes visible. A faint shift in the curtain, a thread of cool air drawn across your wrist. Down the valley, a truck adds 1 bar of bass and removes it. A key on a hook finds equilibrium and stops tapping the wall. There is a pale reflection of the dome in the window, and beyond the glass, the true night leans in. Not urgent, just present. Breath in, count 4. Out, count 6. The weave holds its own time. When I look back at the tools, the lesson is kindly narrow. Each instrument offers a way to make whispers legible. Big mirrors for lines and shapes. Radar, if fortune permits. Arrays for cold gas. orbiters for context, not chase, small telescopes for the heartbeat and the steady drum of position. Scheduling is the hidden craft, moving requests across nights, trading a little signal to noise here for an extra datum there, asking for a target of opportunity slot only when a real opportunity exists. A bench light clicks off, leaving the window to do the last bit of talking. Outside, the sky is a pane with its own soft geometry, a night window we look through without reaching. That is enough. Dear listener, we have kept each other company through quiet rooms and patient numbers, and I would like to place the last page in your hands with the same care we began. We have a traveller on an open curve, energy enough to arrive and to leave, an object that is not bound by our sun and not bound to our hopes. The word for that openness is hyperbolic. The meaning is simple. It came from away, and it will go on. Between those two truths, we practice the small craft of watching. The path we followed was never a promise. It was a line of best agreement that learned as new dots appeared. Sometimes breath from ice joined the script, turning the purely gravitational sentence into one with a soft clause, A1 or A2 in the solver's tongue, centimeters per second sustained, like a long-held note. Sometimes the breath was too faint to name, and we let Newton carry the page alone. Either way, the honesty lived in the test, with breath versus without, and which choice tomorrow preferred. Far off, Jupiter kept its patient wait. We place the giant in our margin notes without turning it into a character. A near miss in celestial terms is still vast, and yet small changes there can be measured at a desk. A clean pass is most likely. A brief linger is allowed by arithmetic. A quiet break is part of the nature of fragile things. None of these variations alters what matters most for your rest. There is no threat in this story, only opportunity for precision. Why pay attention to coincidences that barely graze intuition? Because margins are where methods sharpen. If a window opens, tens of millions of kilometers wide and yet scientifically near, we can weigh a small acceleration, refine a leaving angle, and show that a tiny source of push left its signature in the curve. When the next interstellar mote arrives, we will welcome it with quieter noise and steadier hands. Let the room slow to an easy breath. The dome has its own respiration you can feel on your wrists. A ribbon of air crosses the floor and the paper yields. Somewhere a lift stops gently and remembers to release its brakes. The building's bones are kind tonight, and the kettle decides not to speak. Outside, frost carries moonlight like powdered glass, and somewhere past the fence, a fox edits its route with confidence it did not have last winter. We can borrow that feeling for a minute. The value of unanswered questions is not a slogan here. It is a working rule. We put data on one shelf, plausible interpretations on another, and speculation on a third, with a label and a bell glass. We do not ban wonder. We give it a quiet place so it cannot shout over the measurements. In the morning, what survives is what repeats. What repeats becomes part of the craft. I promised a letter, and letters often end with a small scene that holds more than it says. Picture a shoreline at first light. The night tide has pulled back, leaving a pale wake on sand that records everything, faithfully and judges nothing. A long curve lingers, where a boat moved quietly hours ago. Small shells tilt just enough to catch a faint wind, and then settle again. Far out, the horizon is not a line, but a breath. The sea keeps its promises without telling you what they are. We stand a moment, hands in pockets, and learn to match that patience. The traveller will go. The curve will continue past the edge of our pages. Our logbooks will keep their small, legible entries. We will mend our ephemerides and oil our mounts and rinse the coffee cup and put the pencil back where it belongs. Somewhere in a future night, a new faint smear will cross an ordinary field, and we will be ready with a steadier notebook. For now, let the wake fade to the colour of sleep, and let the room dim without ceremony. The last words whisper to themselves, and step away, fade. We have walked a quiet arc together. A faint traveller entered the neighbourhood, and we listened like patient weathercasters. It came on an open path, the kind that begins far away and continues beyond our lamps. Some nights the fit was simple, and gravity carried the line. Some nights a softer term belonged, breath from ice, adding a whisper that numbers could hear. Through all of it, the giant out there remained what it has always been: steady mass, wide reach, a presence that organizes without intent. We kept scale honest. Near meant space so broad you could not picture it on a wall map, and yet close enough for instruments to weigh small changes. No alarms, just careful comparisons, before and after, with breath and without, clean pass or brief linger, or a body that decides to change its shape with courtesy. We let the methods do their work, and the work stayed kind. If you are drifting now, that is the right outcome. The sky will continue without our help. The traveller will leave the page, as all such visitors do. Our notes remain, dots that became curves, spectra that became entries in a ledger, small truths stacked neatly for the next season. Thank you for keeping this vigil with me, for the steady attention that makes whispering signals legible. May your night be easy, your breathing even, your room a warm harbour. Let the last of the tide slide back, leaving a pale wake on the sand. Sleep well. Good night.